In 1908, a book appeared, published anonymously, no author names, no institution behind it, just 3 words on the cover, 3 initiates, that was all. The book claimed to contain the essential teachings of one of the oldest wisdom traditions in Western history, a tradition that traced itself back to ancient Egypt, to the legendary figure of Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes, the thrice greatest, the greatest philosopher, the greatest priest, the greatest king who ever lived. The book was called the Kybalion, and what it contained was 7 principles, 7 statements about the nature of reality, so precise, so quietly radical, that the people who encountered them could not stop thinking about them, not for days, not for weeks, for years. Because these 7 principles, if they are true, if even partially true, change everything. They change what you think reality is. They change what you think you are. They change what you think is possible. For a human being living an ordinary life, in an ordinary world, 7 laws, governing everything that exists. From the movement of galaxies to the arising of a single thought in your mind, right now, as you listen to these words. Tonight, we are going to go through all 7, not as abstract philosophy to be admired from a distance, as living principles that you can feel operating in your own experience. The moment you understand what they are pointing at, by the end of this, you will not see the world the same way. Not because I'm going to tell you something shocking, but because these 7 principles have a way of reorganizing everything you already know into a pattern you have always sensed was there, but could never quite name. Stay with me. Because what the 3 initiates preserved was never meant to stay hidden. It was always meant to find its way to the right person, at the right moment, perhaps. That moment is now. The first principle is called mentalism. The Kybalion states it this way: the all is mind. The universe is mental. This is the most fundamental of the 7 principles, and also the most quietly revolutionary. What it is saying is that consciousness is not a product of the brain, not a byproduct of matter, not something that appeared late in the story of the universe, after enough complexity had accumulated. It is saying the opposite, that consciousness is the ground, the foundation, the substance from which everything else emerges. Not that the physical world is unreal, not that matter does not exist, but that what we call matter, what we call physical reality, arises within awareness, rather than awareness arising within it. This is not a fringe idea. It has been held by serious thinkers, from Plato through Berkeley through Hegel, to many contemporary philosophers of mind, including David Chalmers, who argues that the inability of physical science to explain why there is subjective experience at all, why it feels like something to be you rather than nothing, points toward consciousness being fundamental, rather than derived from matter. The Vedic tradition called this Brahman, the infinite self-aware ground of all existence. The Buddhist tradition pointed at it through Buddha nature. The Taoist tradition through the Tao. Different languages, different centuries, different cultures separated by thousands of miles, all pointing at the same recognition, that awareness is primary, and that the apparent solidity of the world you see around you rests on something far more fundamental than anything your physical senses can detect. Now, the practical implication of this, if you sit with it honestly, is significant. If consciousness is the ground of reality, then the quality of your inner life is not merely a response to outer circumstances. It participates in shaping them, not in a magical or mechanical way, not as a formula for manifesting what you want, but in the deeper sense that how you attend to reality, what you notice, what you bring awareness to, what you consistently hold in the light of your attention, shapes the reality you inhabit. This is worth sitting with, not as dogma to be believed, as a working hypothesis to be tested in the laboratory of your own experience and observed with honest and open eyes. Corresponds to the structure of the outer. As within, so without. This is the basis of the contemplative practice, of using the outer world as a mirror of the inner. If you consistently encounter a certain kind of difficulty in your outer life, the Hermetic principle of correspondence suggests that something in your inner life corresponds to it, not as punishment, not as cosmic justice, but as a natural expression of the pattern. This is worth investigating honestly, not with guilt, but with genuine curiosity. The third principle is called vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Modern physics has confirmed that what appears solid at the macro level is in constant motion at the atomic and subatomic level. Matter is mostly empty space, and the particles that constitute it are better understood as waves of probability than as solid objects. The Hermetic tradition extends this observation beyond the physical, claiming that thoughts, emotions, states of consciousness also have vibrational qualities. Different qualities of awareness have different qualities of energy. Fear contracts, love expands, clarity illuminates, confusion obscures. This is experientially verifiable. You can feel the difference in quality between a mind that is anxious and contracted and a mind that is open and at ease. Whether this difference constitutes literal vibration in a measurable physical sense is not established, but as a description of qualitative differences in states of consciousness. The principle points at something real. The fourth principle is called polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. This is a sophisticated observation about the nature of apparent opposites. Heat and cold are not fundamentally different things. They are different degrees of the same thing. Temperature, light and dark are different degrees of the same thing. Illumination, love and hate, the Hermetic tradition suggests, are different degrees of the same fundamental energy, directed differently, expressed differently, but sharing the same root. This principle has a practical implication that I find genuinely useful. If opposites are different degrees of the same thing, then transformation between them is possible, not by fighting the unwanted pole, but by moving along the spectrum. Fear, understood as contracted love, can be transformed not by suppressing it, but by gradually opening what it has contracted. This is the alchemical insight, embedded in the principle of polarity. The fifth principle is called rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. This principle describes the cyclical nature of reality, the observation that nothing remains static. That expansion is followed by contraction, growth by decay, day by night, in-breath by out-breath. The Taoist tradition expresses this through the concept of yin and yang, the constant cycling between complementary poles. The Vedic tradition describes the cycles of the yugas, the vast cycles of cosmic time. The practical wisdom of this principle is the development of what might be called equanimity, the capacity to remain relatively stable through the inevitable rhythms of experience, not denying the rhythms, not fighting them, but developing the stability that can hold them without being overwhelmed. The sixth principle is called cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Nothing happens by chance. Chance is merely a name for law not recognized. This is perhaps the most straightforward of the seven principles. It is essentially the principle of causality, the recognition that events arise from prior conditions, that nothing occurs in a vacuum. The Hermetic tradition extends this beyond the physical, to include the inner life. Every inner state has causes. Every pattern of thought and feeling arose from prior conditions, and every inner state generates effects in how you perceive and respond to experience. The practical value of this principle is the development of genuine responsibility, not blame. Responsibility, the recognition that your inner life has causes that can be understood and effects that can be worked with. The seventh principle is called gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. This principle is the most easily misunderstood because the Kybalion is using gender as a metaphor for two fundamental principles that it identifies as operating throughout reality. Not biological sex, but the complementary principles of active and receptive, projective and containing, initiating and nurturing. These complementary principles are recognized across traditions: yin and yang in the Taoist tradition, Shiva and Shakti in the Vedic tradition, sun and moon in the alchemical tradition. The Hermetic claim is that both principles are necessary for any genuine creativity, any genuine manifestation, that the exclusively active mind that only projects and initiates, without receptivity and containment, cannot complete the creative cycle, and the exclusively receptive mind that only receives and contains, without initiation and direction, also cannot complete it. Genuine creativity, in whatever domain, requires the integration of both principles. So what do we make of all this? Seven principles, some pointing at things that are genuinely verifiable, some expressing philosophical positions that are meaningful but not proven, some using metaphorical language that can be misunderstood if taken too literally. The honest assessment is this: the Hermetic principles are not scientific laws. They are philosophical observations, frameworks for understanding experience, some of which have genuine depth and practical value, and some of which require careful critical engagement to distinguish genuine insight from speculation. The tradition they draw from, the genuine Hermetic tradition of the ancient world, produced some of the most sophisticated metaphysical thinking in Western history, and engaging with that tradition seriously is worth doing, with open minds and honest inquiry, not as believers, not as skeptics, but as genuine seekers who are willing to examine a framework carefully and take from it what genuinely serves the deepening of understanding, subscribe to sacred flame, because this exploration continues. Until next time, as above, so below, as within, so without. Examine the principles, test them against your own experience, and keep only what proves genuinely true. That is the Hermetic way, and it is the only honest way. Let me go deeper into each principle with more practical detail, because I think the real value of the Hermetic principles is not in believing them as metaphysical truths, but in using them as lenses, as ways of examining experience more carefully. Let us return to the first principle, mentalism. The practical question is this: what would change in your daily life if you took seriously the idea that the quality of your consciousness shapes the quality of your experience, not magically, not mechanically, but in the simple sense that what you attend to, what you bring awareness to, what you value and what you dismiss, determines a great deal of what you actually experience. Two people can walk through the same city and have completely different experiences, not because the city is different, but because the quality of their attention is different. One notices beauty, connection, possibility. The other notices threat, scarcity, evidence of what is wrong. Neither is seeing the complete picture, but the quality of their attention is shaping their experience of reality in a very real way. This is the practical meaning of mentalism. Not that you can think your way to any outcome, but that the quality of mind you bring to experience matters enormously and can be cultivated. Now let me go deeper into correspondence. The practical application of this principle goes beyond the idea that outer reflects inner. It also suggests that understanding one level of reality can illuminate another. The ancient Hermeticists studied the stars, not just to understand astronomy, but because they believed the patterns in the heavens corresponded to patterns in human experience. This is the basis of astrology, which, whether or not you accept its claims, was understood by its practitioners as a system of correspondence, a way of using the observable patterns of one domain to illuminate the less observable patterns of another. The same logic underlies many contemplative practices, using the patterns of the breath to understand the patterns of the mind, using the patterns of relationship to understand the patterns of the inner life, using the natural world as a mirror of something in human experience. The principle of correspondence, when applied honestly and carefully, is a genuinely useful tool for deepening understanding. Let me go deeper into the principle of vibration. The most practically useful aspect of this principle is the recognition that states of consciousness are contagious. The quality of awareness in a room affects everyone in it. The emotional state of one person influences the emotional states of those around them. This is not mysticism, it is measurable physiology. The HeartMath Institute has documented that the electromagnetic field of the heart extends several feet beyond the physical body, and that coherent heart states in one person can influence the physiological states of others nearby. The practical implication is significant. The quality of your inner life is not a private matter. It affects those around you, and cultivating genuine inner coherence, genuine stillness and clarity is not just personally beneficial, it is a contribution to every environment you inhabit. This is the practical meaning of the principle of vibration. Now let me address something about these principles honestly. The Kybalion was written in 1908. Its authors are unknown. Its claim to represent ancient Hermetic teaching is based on their own assertion. Serious scholars of Hermeticism, including Wouter Hanegraaff and others, have noted that the Kybalion blends genuine Hermetic ideas with 19th century New Thought philosophy, which is a distinctly modern American movement. This does not mean the principles are worthless, but it means the claim that they are ancient, revealed truths should be held lightly. The genuine ancient Hermetic texts, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Asclepius, the Emerald Tablet, are real historical documents, and they contain genuine philosophical depth, but they do not present the 7 principles in the neat systematic form the Kybalion offers. That systematization is largely a modern creation. I share this not to dismiss the Kybalion, but because I think intellectual honesty makes the genuine insights more trustworthy, not less. A framework that acknowledges its own limitations is more credible than one that claims absolute ancient authority, and the genuine insights in the Hermetic tradition do not need false claims to be valuable. They stand on their own merits as philosophical observations worth engaging with seriously. Let me offer you a practical exercise for working with the 7 principles, not as a belief system, but as a contemplative investigation. Choose one principle, just one, and for 1 week, use it as a lens. If you choose correspondence, ask throughout the day, what does this outer situation correspond to in my inner life? What does this pattern I observe in the world reflect about the state of my own consciousness? If you choose rhythm, notice the rhythms in your energy, in your mood, in your relationships. Where does expansion naturally lead to contraction? Where does effort naturally give way to rest? If you choose cause and effect, look honestly at the causes of your current situation, not to assign blame, but to understand clearly what inner and outer conditions have contributed to where you are now. This kind of honest investigation, applied through the lens of the Hermetic principles, can reveal things about your experience that ordinary habitual awareness misses. Not because the principles are magic, but because they direct attention to aspects of experience that are genuinely there, but that we typically overlook. This is the practical value of philosophical frameworks, not as rigid belief systems, but as tools for directed inquiry. Subscribe to Sacred Flame, because this work continues. Video by video, we examine the ancient wisdom seriously and honestly, taking what genuinely serves understanding and releasing what does not. Until next time, choose one principle, investigate it honestly in the laboratory of your own experience, and see what it reveals. That is the Hermetic way, and it remains worth doing. Let me take each principle deeper now, with specific examples from history and from daily life, because I think the principles become most useful when they are grounded in concrete experience, rather than remaining abstract philosophy. Let us return to mentalism with a historical example. William James, the American philosopher and psychologist, often called the father of American psychology, spent decades investigating the relationship between mind and experience. His conclusion was not that mind creates reality in some magical sense, but that the quality of attention, the habitual orientation of consciousness, profoundly shapes what a person actually experiences. He wrote extensively about what he called the stream of consciousness, the continuous flow of mental life, and observed that selective attention, the capacity to choose what we attend to, was one of the most significant human faculties, not because attention changes external reality directly, but because what we attend to determines what we experience, and our experience is our reality. This is a much more modest and defensible claim than the popular version of the law of attraction, but it is also genuinely significant because most people never seriously examine what they habitually attend to, what they consistently notice, and what they consistently overlook, and therefore never realize how much of their experience of reality is shaped by this habitual selective attention. The Hermetic principle of mentalism, at its most honest and most useful, is an invitation to examine this, to become more conscious of what you attend to, and to develop the capacity to direct attention more deliberately. Now let me go deeper into polarity with a practical example. The principle of polarity suggests that what appear to be opposites are actually different degrees of the same thing, and that transformation between poles is possible. This has a very practical application in emotional life. Anxiety and excitement are physiologically almost identical states, the same elevated heart rate, the same heightened alertness, the same mobilization of energy. What differs is the interpretation. Anxiety interprets the state as threatening. Excitement interprets the same state as opportunity. Research by psychologist Alison Woodbrooks at Harvard has demonstrated that simply reinterpreting anxiety as excitement improves performance on challenging tasks, not by suppressing the feeling, but by shifting its meaning, by moving along the spectrum from one pole towards the other. This is the practical application of polarity, not a magical transformation, but a genuine shift in how a state is understood. That changes how it is experienced and expressed. The same principle applies to many apparent opposites: stubbornness and persistence, different poles of the same quality, sensitivity and reactivity, different poles of the same capacity. Seeing these as poles on a spectrum, rather than as fixed character traits, opens the possibility of movement, of developing the capacity more fully, rather than simply accepting the fixed label. Now let me explore the principle of rhythm more deeply, because I think this is one of the most practically useful and most neglected of the 7 principles. Modern culture has a profound bias toward expansion, toward growth, toward more, toward progress. The contracting phases of natural rhythm, rest, withdrawal, dormancy, reflection, are treated as problems to be solved, as failures of productivity, as obstacles to progress. But the natural world demonstrates, with complete consistency, that contraction is not the enemy of expansion. It is its necessary complement. Winter is not the failure of summer. It is the condition that makes the next summer possible. The outbreath is not the failure of the in-breath. It is what makes the next in-breath possible. The Hermetic principle of rhythm, when genuinely understood, produces a quality of patience with the contracting phases of life, not passive resignation, but the wisdom to recognize that withdrawal and rest and reflection are not interruptions to the meaningful life. They are essential parts of it. The periods when energy is low, when creativity seems absent, when forward movement seems impossible, may be the periods when the deepest integration is happening, when what was learned in the expanding phase is being consolidated at a deeper level. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, effortless non-doing, points at the same wisdom. The recognition that forcing expansion during a contracting phase is working against the natural rhythm, and that the most effective action is often the action that works with the rhythm, rather than against it. Finally, let me say something about the principle of cause and effect that I think is genuinely important. The Kybalion states that nothing happens by chance. That chance is merely a name for law not recognized. This is a strong claim, and I want to be honest about its limits. Modern physics has demonstrated that at the quantum level, genuine indeterminacy exists. Events that cannot, in principle, be predicted, even with complete knowledge of prior conditions. So the absolute determinism implied by the principle of cause and effect is not consistent with our best current understanding of physics. But at the level of human experience, the practical truth of the principle remains significant. Most of what appears random or accidental in human life has causes that can be understood if we are willing to look honestly. The pattern that keeps repeating in relationships is not random bad luck. It has causes in the patterns of the inner life. The recurring difficulty at work is not arbitrary misfortune. It has causes that can be examined. The principle of cause and effect, applied honestly to human experience, invites a quality of genuine investigation, rather than resignation to apparent fate, or victimhood in the face of apparent injustice. This is its practical value, not metaphysical determinism, but the invitation to look honestly at the causes of your experience, and to work with those causes, rather than simply suffering the effects. Subscribe to Sacred Flame, because this is the spirit of genuine inquiry that the Hermetic tradition at its best embodies. Not belief, not dogma, not ancient authority, but honest investigation of the principles that may govern experience, applied carefully to the laboratory of your own life. Until next time, take one principle, live with it for a week, investigate it honestly, in your own experience, and see what it reveals. The Hermetic tradition does not ask for belief, it asks for investigation. That is an invitation worth accepting. I want to close with something that I think matters deeply. For anyone who takes the Hermetic tradition seriously, the question of what the tradition was ultimately pointing toward. Because the 7 principles, as interesting and useful as they are, were never meant to be the destination. They were meant to be a doorway to a direct encounter with what the tradition calls the all, the infinite awareness in which all of reality appears, the corpus hermeticum. The genuine ancient Hermetic texts are not primarily philosophical treatises. They are records of spiritual experience, of direct encounters with the divine, of moments in which the ordinary barriers between individual consciousness and the ground of being temporarily dissolved. And what was seen in those moments was not a set of principles. It was a direct recognition of the nature of reality, of what the individual actually is, of the relationship between consciousness and existence, that no set of principles can fully capture. The principles point at something, but they are not the thing itself. As the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The truth that can be systematized into 7 principles is not the full truth, it is a map, and maps are useful. They help you navigate toward the territory, but they are not the territory itself. The territory is your own direct experience, your own genuine inquiry, your own honest investigation of what is actually here. When you look carefully, when you are genuinely still, when the ordinary noise of the conditioned mind settles enough for something deeper to become perceptible. This is what the Hermetic tradition was ultimately pointing at. Not a set of beliefs, not a cosmological system, but a direct encounter with what is actually real. And that encounter is available to you. Not through believing the 7 principles, but through the honest and patient investigation of your own experience that the principles can support, if used as tools rather than as doctrines. That is the Hermetic invitation, and it remains worth accepting. Subscribe to Sacred Flame. Until next time, investigate honestly, look carefully, and trust what you actually find, rather than what you have been told to find. That is wisdom in any tradition, in any time, including now.